Hello, everybody. Welcome today to our session, Perspectives and the Demand for Digital Health Innovations during this horrible pandemic we're going through. Heart Rhythm Society and our Digital Health Committee decided to put this session together to practically talk to the key opinion leaders and leaders in the field of digital health, where innovation is happening, and tackling where tackling this major issue has been a center point of what we do today. So I'm joined by five leaders, as I mentioned, and I will let them introduce themselves to tackle a couple of questions. It's a roundtable discussion. We will be talking about a couple of aspects, a couple of questions, Q&A with all five of them, and hopefully at the end we'll come with some understanding and guidance and consensus in what's going on today in medicine, and specifically in digital health, and how we're navigating through this. I want to start with David Roux. Please, Dave, go ahead.
Hi, Nassir. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to join you today. My name is David Roux. I'm the Global Chief Medical Officer for Microsoft. I'm also the chairman of CTA's, that's the Consumer Technology Association's Health and Fitness Technology Board. Thanks.
Hi, Nassir, thanks for the invitation. I'm David Hayes. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Biotronic, Inc., U.S. headquarters in Lake Oswego, Oregon. I really appreciate this. I think it's an important topic. I've only been in this role since about 6 weeks prior to the pandemic. And despite, the many tragedies of the pandemic, this certainly is doing something to move digital health. So look forward to this discussion with the others on the panel. Thank you.
Great, thanks, David. Nassir, thank you so much. Paul Burton, I'm Chief Global Medical Affairs Officer at Janssen, the pharmaceutical company of Johnson & Johnson. As everybody says, a great opportunity to really talk about how we can digitalize and democratize research in medicine and fuel that, get something good out of what's been going on here.
So hello, everybody, and thanks for the invitation, Nassir. So I'm Greg Marcus. I'm a practicing electrophysiologist, a professor of medicine at UCSF, and involved in many digital trials that either use the internet or smartphone apps to conduct research, such as the Healthy Heart Study. Also helped to run an NIH-funded program that we've called Eureka, that's been built to help facilitate mobile health-based research. Happy to discuss more about that.
Okay, my name is Heidi Dose, and I'm the founder of Tour de Heart, which is a patient advocacy and support organization. And I'm just excited to be a part of this panel and this discussion as a patient, as someone who has been using digital tools and apps to be able to improve my personal outcome and show other heart patients what's possible.
Thank you, everybody. As you could tell, everybody who's listening, we have a very loaded talent here in this Zoom roundtable. Let me start, guys, with the first topic I want to tackle with you. It came to us, and I'm obviously, by the way, I forgot to present myself and introduce myself. I'm Nassir Marrouche, Tulane University. I'm a cardiologist, electrophysiologist as well. And as I said, I'm heading the Digital Health Committee for our society, the Heart Rhythm Society. It came to us, this is a question to all of you. I think that the way I would like to discuss this today with you would be two components. One is how this became a reality overnight, digital health in our life. We were like researching it. It was exciting to talk about it. Call David Roux sometimes, what's the next big innovation? Well, let's put this drug in digital health and monitor it. David Hayes, how you monitor your patient. Heidi, we use your Fitbit. Greg Marcus was the first to start, doing a heart study. This was all exciting. Now it's become suddenly overnight part of our life. This is it. It's right here and at the doors. So the first part of our discussion I would like to know from all of you is how we're dealing with it today, now, what we're doing, what's the acute plan from your perspectives, where you stand as the leaders in this field, tackling this current situation, and what we're doing long term, because this is here to stay. There's no way it's going back, obviously. So let's start with the first question. This came to us overnight, handed over to us. and we start one by one, start with David, continue that pattern. Everybody like maybe 5 to 6, 7 minutes discussing, how we're dealing with this today from microscope, David Roop point of perspective.
Yeah, Nassir, it's a really good point because these are technologies and approaches that we've been talking about for years. In many ways, we've been testing, experimenting, but also validating that these solutions can work well. What we hadn't anticipated was the massive amount of demand that would accumulate very rapidly when individuals were sort of socially distanced at home. And that meant that there were some of the technologies that we would have to very much rely on. I mean, telemedicine is the obvious one, where we've now started to recognize that in order to communicate with healthcare providers, we're going to have to go through a different channel. But what we've also learned is that there are so many different aspects towards how care and basically social interactions need to occur that we hadn't even anticipated. So I'll give you a few examples of things that we saw. One was a technology that we were working on for many years around AI bots, using these technologies to help understand individuals to be able to better manage questions. And then what we learned is that in that process of kind of building these technologies out, the number of people that would need to be managed very quickly dramatically changed the need for this bot. In fact, what we did is we modified the bot to then focus on COVID-19 screening. And as part of that process, we learned that it wasn't just a tool for individuals to learn information and be able to be immediately sort of directed to places to go, but it was a useful tool for organizations that were having a massive influx of questions and comments and concerns. And so the organizations such as hospitals, health systems, and governments began to start adopting the use of the COVID screening bot. In fact, it's currently the technology that stands behind the CDC symptom checker bot. And so it gives you a sense in terms of like how this could be used. And what we learned is that when the bot allows us to understand who's eligible or who needs to receive treatments, there's a natural handoff that needs to occur to a telemedicine provider. Now that also in itself, we hadn't anticipated that there would be a need for triage just for the telemedicine pieces. In talking with many of the telemedicine providers out there, they are already trying to handle regular medicine, regular issues, chronic care through telemedicine. And then when you add on top of it COVID-19, it was just overwhelming. And so the bot allowed us to be able to then further triage and direct and enable more efficient scheduling. And what we've seen is a 40% decrease in call volumes when we use these bots. So the impact it has so that we can help maintain systems in place, not overwhelm them. I mean, that's clearly been one of the key themes, not overwhelming the health system, not overwhelming the infrastructure. Using technology has enabled us to become far more efficient and has resulted in, I'd say, not only an improved experience for the individuals, but also better care.
Thank you, David. We'll come back and discuss this maybe at the end of the first round. David Hayes, please, can you share with us?
Thanks, Nassir. So let me just preface my viewpoint by saying that before starting this role as Chief Medical Officer, I had an academic career for many years, and my whole career was around cardiac rhythm management, implantable devices. So in that field where remote monitoring has been available for 20 years, it was something we were already doing, but what we were really forced to look at as a result of the pandemic, as we're trying to keep patients safe, as we're trying to give them peace of mind, but letting them know the devices were being cared for and everything was being watched over, it was simply a matter of extending what we were already doing. So, for example, with Biotronic, the home monitoring system does daily transmissions, and patients could be reassured that if something occurred that was problematic, it would be picked up. But what I think this will lead us to is a couple of different things. First of all, even though remote monitoring for devices has been around for 20 years, it's really been, the rules or guidelines haven't been looked at for some time. And there are many of those visits where we see patients in clinic that really are not actionable. And I think one of the things that we're learning through the pandemic is that many of the office visits that we were all routinely doing are probably not necessary. And in addition, patients, I think the more they do this, actually the more they like remote monitoring, telemedicine, telehealth, everything that it brings. The other thing that we're finding is that with something like COVID-19 at top of mind, is that are there other parameters that we could or should be watching that might give us clues, not just about, in my field, in cardiac rhythm management, but in other chronic diseases or even in infectious diseases such as COVID-19. If you have implantable devices that can watch daily heart rate, mean heart rate, perhaps respiratory rate, intrathoracic impedance, all of which, or even temperature sensing, all of which could give you clues about something going on that may be subclinical that the patient wasn't aware of, yet on daily monitoring that could be picked up. So I think we're going to be looking at an expansion of how we can use many of these tools remotely, how we can embellish what we're already doing outside of the office, and probably the office visits are going to decrease significantly over time, in large part as a result of what's been forced upon us.
We'll come back to this. I'm sorry, I tried to say that a lot of questions, obviously, and input on David's just comments and introduction, but let's go to Paul. Paul, you've been ahead of the curve with your Heartline study, right? So you dictating the new wave in new medicine. If you say digital medicine today is a new medicine, I would call it. You were ahead of the curve 2 years ago. You started this Heartline study with Janssen and Apple, and you were trying to tackle this early on, and now this hit you. So you've been dealing this in multiple ways with the huge Heartline concept and the reality now. So how does this hit, and how you building on this acutely?
Yeah, no, thanks, Nassir. I mean, look, we've been thinking about this for a long time now. I would say to you provocatively that by 2025, digital medicine will be a foundational part of how, as healthcare providers, as industry, we bring clinical care to patients. It will speed the time to diagnosis. It will increase the accuracy of diagnosis. So I think that the opportunities of digital health are really huge. And I think we've been exploring that. We started with a study called MSTOPS, where we were working with an insurance organization to identify patients and then mail them wearable patches. But really what's happened now is that the technology that we have to bring to patients, either wearable, even invisible digital technology, sensors that you can have in your home, I think has advanced so much that really we're now bridled only by our imagination. So I would say, Nassir, what's happened is that the technology has been around, but I think as an industry and as clinicians, it's only today that we've realized the power that it has. And as you say, we're harnessing that now with Heartline, enrolling and randomizing people over the age of 65 to a watch, the Apple Watch, to look for AFib and then track clinical outcomes. And we have another study called CHIEF-HF, which is enrolling people with heart failure and randomizing them to one medicine or placebo. So it's a new era, and it's been accelerated, and it will continue to be accelerated, I think, by the pandemic. Patients and physicians want more and are demanding more from digital. And as an industry and as partners with academia and clinicians, we have to be able to meet that.
Great, Paul. Great introduction. Thank you. It's a great leeway to Greg.
Yeah, so when we started the Healthy Heart Study now several years ago, it was kind of due to the converging of two phenomena. One was just the growing ubiquitous nature of the internet and wearables and sensors that we realized everyone's purchasing these things and carrying them around in their pockets anyway. So why not take advantage of that? And then really a lot of the voices from patients, and Heidi was herself one of our early participants and an advocate for us. And in speaking with patients that contributed to just conventional research, recognizing that for many it was inconvenient to come into a brick and mortar facility, that there were many more that were actually really interested in contributing to research, being part of research, but they just didn't have time, they didn't have access. And so we sought to then utilize the technology people had ready access to try to conduct research. And obviously that's become immediately and directly relevant to the situation we're all in today. In many ways, I mean, I think that because of the pandemic and shelter in place, we lament the fact of how isolated and siloed we are. On the other hand, it is empowering to the individual and is a good example of what each individual can do. And technology is really this tool, and we're so fortunate that we live in this current day and age where not that long ago, if we were all forced to be separate, we certainly wouldn't be able to have a webinar like this where we could all see each other and communicate like this. So I think leveraging this technology is a very efficient way to go about research. And as Paul alluded to, I think we're just starting to break in to figuring out how we can use these even more sophisticated sensors, such as the Apple Watch, Fitbits, the LifeCore cardio device. I think just now speaking clinically and thinking about a lot of the discussions around the Apple Watch, for example, there's been a lot of emphasis, appropriately so, on the screening of AFib and the concern about false positives. One of the things that I think has been neglected a little bit is the power of the Apple Watch, the Cardio Mobile, to detect disease among people who are symptomatic, or just to help facilitate the clinical care of those people. It is extraordinarily helpful to be able to check in with a patient and for them to send that transmission. And in that sense, I think as electrophysiologists, we're also especially fortunate in that our stethoscope is essentially the ECG, so that we can receive a lot of the pertinent information we're most interested in without actually interacting in person with the patient, which opens up a lot of opportunities for us as clinicians, for our patients, and for research.
Thank you, Greg. Heidi, I've been around you for a while now. I know you very well, and you've been leading this field. And if I want to start with this discussion, I could have started in a different way. I could have started with saying the patient is empowered as never before. Take it from here, Heidi. So enlighten us. You've been through this process, as Greg mentioned, from early on, and you still driving this with David and the Googles and the others. And so please update us how this today acutely affected what you're doing and how you using your knowledge in today's world in the last 2 months practically to guide the new patients to the next step in digital health.
Thank you. As Greg mentioned, I actually started this journey in 1983. And that's when I became an experimental patient and became 100% dependent on implanted devices. So I've been pacemaker dependent for 30 some years. And what that means is that I've been digitally driven, or I've been in, my lifestyle has been dependent on having information. And at first it started with what is the information that I can get from the implanted device through my doctor appointment in the the pacer clinic, and it was very limited. So fast forward and during this journey, I kind of got on the early adoption of how do I use a polar heart rate monitor, not just as an athlete for performance metrics, but as a heart patient to have some sort of window into my body. And that was probably 10 years ago. And then in the last, if we look at just the last, 5 years to where we are today with AliveCore and Apple Watches and Fitbits and all of this great information, the ability to capture data that I can use to make sure that that as a heart patient, everything is working as intended. And when I do have an anomaly, that I can capture that data point and I can send that little, Apple Watch ECG PDF to my physician, and we can have a conversation, and I can say, hey, by the way, this is how I felt, but he can see what my heart was doing. And then we can make, a determination of how to go forward. And so because I've been doing this for so long, I actually, through my different devices and my apps, many of them being like Strava that captures my historical segments and performance data from cycling. So here we are in the world of COVID. And as a heart patient, I actually fall into the high risk category. So what do you do when you're high risk and you want to make sure that you're actually staying safe? You can't really get to the physician or the doctor, but knowing what my baselines and what would change if I were exposed or if I were dealing with COVID, increased in heart rate, in kind of your base resting heart rate, temperature, blood pressure. There's some signals you can look at that if you're exposed and if you're starting to wonder if you're symptomatic or having, something you should go to the doctor, I can do a lot of this at home, which just from the peace of mind perspective makes me feel better. It's like, yep, heart rate's looking good, blood pressure's great, don't have a temperature, I don't need to worry. And so just the idea that we have all of these great tools that especially over time, and you understand what your baselines are, you can start to look at when you might be moving from wellness to sick and be proactive, and then using telemedicine and just virtual conversations with your physician, you don't have to put yourself in harm's way, and going to the doctor. So I'm finding that all of the tools that I've used over time as a patient and an athlete to have information to feel safe and live the life that I would like are coming in and being really important during COVID-19 to also make sure that I'm healthy, I'm well, and if something did come up as a high-risk patient, I would be able to reach out and communicate with my physicians.
That's beautiful, Heidi. Thank you for this. This is a great review as well from a patient perspective. You just detailed what you have in tools to empower patient today. David, it's a question to you, and this is open, guys. You can interfere and let's make an open discussion about what we heard. David, back to you. An initial introduction. You practically introduced AI in your perspective. What you're trying to do with the boot program, and the challenge we're facing today and acutely is not all of us, not every hospital, not every clinic, not every patient. As you can tell, there's two components to this whole digital health concept. The one component is the patient itself. Before, a patient would come to the clinic, waiting outside, and I would pull him in. I would do the ECG. I decide when to do the echocardiogram or take a temperature or pressure or whatever. But now the patient, the Heidis of the world, and the patients are a major component of this, and they have to decide. A major part of my practice as a physician changed overnight. They decide when to take the pressure. They come to me in a telehealth. They decide when to be on to talk to me. They decide when to take the blood pressure. They make all this decision. So it's a new population that Heidi is an exception, and that's why we heard today what she can do. It was important to note what she can do, but how can we implement this overnight and so fast? I mean, I can tell you examples. I think maybe Greg and others would share this with me, is how much I get frustrated because I want that blood pressure right now from that patient because he's on I want to change that pill, or I would love to know what his heart rhythm look like, but he doesn't have the specific device. What can be done from, I'm talking from the industry, from the driver's perspective, the Microsoft of the world, the Janssen's and the Biotronics, in terms of getting the patient closer? We send them iPads for free and give it to them from Microsoft to everybody, and Biotronic and Janssen will work with you on this, or what's your concept? Because this is number one. Number two, there is still 30% of our population that we're dealing with in certain areas doesn't have access to these tools. they can't see a physician per telehealth. How can we overcome these challenges that became reality overnight? It's not something we can, let's wait for the next new invention to make it happen. We need to deal with this acutely, obviously long term. So I start with you answering these challenges I gave it to you as a Microsoft.
Yeah, the technologies can allow us to be able to capture the data and allow us to visualize it, but how it's done and the ability for us to make that easier is so critical towards adoption and the overall value that we create. We all know the challenges that exist if technologies are not workflow compatible from a clinician standpoint. The same can be said from a patient perspective. If it's not lifestyle compatible, if it doesn't address the issues that one individual has relative to type of device, type of accessibility to internet, the ability to even understand that I may have specific needs relative to my ability to visualize, to hear, to touch certain things. We have to think through these usability issues if we want to enable these tools to be effectively used. Some of the things that we've been honing in on over the past couple of years has been how can artificial intelligence help just simply using voice as a mechanism to be able to then enable that type of interaction. And we've seen great consumer tools that allow us to be able to take voice and create actions. But what we also need to do is extend that consumer concept towards healthcare tools. So how, in the course of a conversation that you're having with a physician, how can that be captured in an ambient clinical intelligence manner so that it's all captured and then incorporated seamlessly into the medical record? It changes the user experience. These are the types of technologies that are now being developed and deployed. What we are recognizing is that along the way, there are many, I'll call it pain points. First and foremost, the individual, their accessibility to the technologies. If they don't have Wi-Fi, or it's not set up, or if they don't have the internet, or they don't have the ability to afford a phone, those are all barriers towards adoption. And so we have to think through those processes. Once you get to that point, ideally, you'd like to be able to make this as seamless as possible. Not everyone is able to remember their username password. Security, how do you balance the security around and the privacy issues with the usability issues? And we've seen that today, even with telemedicine. If you're going to do a telemedicine visit, it's got to also be secure. And so we're starting to recognize the need for that. So along the way, we're starting to apply these enterprise principles that we are, we hold tried and true within the hospital and the healthcare setting to outside of the hospital to make sure that the communications, the devices that we're looking at are FDA cleared, that the communication channels are solid, they're HIPAA compliant, that the ability for us to address usability issues are all there, applying new technologies. This is a new frontier for us. So as I look at what we need to do, similar to what we've done in the past, we've sort of paved the path with a lot of digital tools. Now we just need to make that road smoother.
Make it smoother. David, how is Biotronic working on these challenges? There's a patient. You're a patient oriented. You have the mobile health technology over the years, as you mentioned. You've been championing this. Home monitoring came out early on before anybody else. But the patient becoming, as I said, as Heidi started and I mentioned, is part of is a major part of what we do. Always been, but then like I'm sick, but now she have to contribute. She have to test herself. She have to check herself. What you're doing in this areas and connecting, you're connecting greatly to us, but what's Biotronic doing in that field specifically going forward and acutely?
So a couple of things. First of all, I think that a lot of the information that Heidi talked about, and obviously Heidi's very sophisticated, having a lot of years of experience in looking at her own data, that we have worked on trying to make that data more available to the patient and helping the patient understand it. And there was the HRS position paper, I think in 2019, and Nassir, I think you were an advisor about digital data transparency for the patient. And that's going to become more and more critical, I believe, is and let me separate out, because Greg or others would be much more expert, or David, on the commercially available devices. But for an implantable device, how do we best take that extreme amount of data and not just make it available for the clinician, but make whatever amount the patient wants, the concerned patient, available to them and available in a way that makes sense to them. And then other layers of granularity for the clinician. So we're working on that. And I think that we have more to learn. I think right now, you know, clinicians can access that anytime they want through the company or directly through the programmer at this point in time. But we need to work on that. And we also know that the data that we're receiving is always only going to get greater and greater. I mean, you're all familiar with some of the AI data where now with an ECG, we can pretty reliably determine gender and age and perhaps ejection fraction and all sorts of other things coming through AI. So we're going to have to learn how to better package this and make it available to the patient on a routine basis. So that's one of the things that we will continue to build on and iterate in months to come. But I would go back and just echo, I thought Heidi's comments were especially important as I look back at my clinical experience with patients, and being one of the people 20 years ago when remote monitoring was first presented said, patients will hate this. They want to come see the doctor. They want to come talk to the nurse that does their transmission. And yes, they do want to maintain those relationships, but they're very happy maintaining those relationships remotely. And again, it's changing. And you've heard probably many organizations say, as we go forward, and this is even without the pandemic, it's not about the doctor will see you now. It's going to be the patient will see you now. And how do we respond in the right place at the right time with the right data to the patient's needs?
Thank you, David. I mean, Paul, the drug industry, which is, everything as every single patient is taking a certain drug, maybe almost all of them. How do you see your role? Is it working with, like you're doing the hotline? How do you see a role as a leader in this field, healthcare chain digitally? You mentioned this, doing studies and multiple studies, but driving day-by-day practice, where do you see your role as a driver? What you'll be doing already?
So I think, Nassir, digital technology, it does democratize research. You don't need to live in a large urban city to be able to get into a clinical trial. You can live anywhere now today, and you can use digital technology to be part of that. So that's a great thing. Cost will continue, I think, to be a barrier for a while, but prices are coming down. It's becoming easier and easier to obtain this kind of technology. I think, fundamentally, what are we taught at medical school? It's that you need to take a history, perform an examination and some tests, and ultimately make a diagnosis. Because once you've diagnosed a problem, then you can think about treatment options. But I think an issue that physicians and other healthcare providers face today is this slew of treatment options. And sometimes it's baffling and just overwhelming to come up with the best option for a patient. There are many companies out there today that will take the digital data, biomarker data, data from imaging, and can triage and risk adjust patients and come up with treatment solutions. Computers today are better at making a diagnosis of retinal eye disease, of lung cancer. The first issue of Nature this year showed that using artificial intelligence and image analysis, computers are better at making a diagnosis of breast cancer on mammogram films. So being able to harness the power of digital medicine, integrate it into algorithms, I think for us as an industry, what it allows is to then risk stratify patients and really come up with, okay, for me, personalized today, based on my digital phenotype and other clinical characteristics, the best pathway of care and the best therapeutics that will ensure the best clinical outcome for me personally is the follows. That's hugely powerful. It's powerful for us as physicians. It's tremendously powerful for patients.
Great, thank you, Paul. Greg, you've been doing the eHeart study for years, you said, and we were there when you started 7 years ago. How are you implementing what you learned? Is something you learned from this 7 years experience studying and being in the research part, and now being as a physician to implement what you into today's practice? We talked about a lot of things today, but in terms of practicality, how are you using it as a physician when you wake up in the morning, you're in your clinic or your office, what you learned from this eHeart study, right? We're using these tools that are available to us today.
Yeah, so I think that there's something a little counterintuitive, which is actually the importance of the humanities in many ways. Those sorts of disciplines, you know, the fancy complex technology is kind of the first step. And as has been alluded to, that can end up being a lot of data to sift through. And I think as we think about both how the physician's gonna consume that and how the patient's gonna interact with it, if you think about Richard Thaler's work, who recently won the Nobel Prize in economics, that was essentially proving that if you want to get someone to do something, make it easy or make it simple, make it digestible. And I think, you know, that is where artificial intelligence will help physicians sift through these huge amounts of data. But there's the other side, which is the patient interaction side or research participant. And as has been alluded to, Heidi is, I think, extraordinarily sophisticated and motivated. And unfortunately, not all patients are that sophisticated or motivated. So to make sure we can enable them to leverage the various options available to them, to make sure we can collect the information from them, we need designers, not just the technical builders, but the people who understand design, understand engagement with individuals to get them to be able to work through these interfaces. I can say that, you know, a common question is, well, you know, the older people aren't going to be able to do this. You guys aren't going to be able to enroll any older people. That's not true at all. If you are able to design it well, then by definition, it needs to be easy to do, and you should not have to be technically sophisticated to interact with these things. So I think more and more we're going to recognize the value of those designers, of those engagement experts. And that's ultimately also what's going to contribute to the success of the use of these various devices and approaches.
Well said, thank you, Greg. Heidi, in terms of going back to your, you know, you're on every side. I can say you're a patient, you're a driver, you're a KOL, you're everything in terms of driving this field forward. But in terms of what I'm seeing, AI, how are you seeing this as a patient, as an AI? You want to press a button and see a result and take a pill, or you want to, how are you seeing it implemented in what you're doing? We talk about AI a lot, and Greg just mentioned it, as well as what David been doing, and the two Davids actually. But how do you see a patient, the use of AI? What does AI mean for you in terms of daily practice? Is it the software? Is it what?
Well, so it's interesting. AI, from the standpoint of algorithms improving performance, it actually starts in my pacemaker. My device itself has, you know, certain algorithms. I don't have a lot of input other than I can train it. But, you know, when I think about how does AI improve my experience, number one, it's the fact that as we move to being able to ingest all of this data from different data streams, implantables, wearables, environmentals, pulling that in, transforming that, applying the AI algorithms to have those aha moments or actionable insights. And it's those actionable insights delivered to me either on my watch or my wearable or on my mobile device in a dashboard. Those are the insights that allow me to not have to just live in the world of being a patient and using data to be just a better patient. This is the information that allows me to be a happy person. These are the insights that I can say, okay, I can take on this activity. I'm far more interested in my life as an athlete and how do I get to the finish line faster. And many of the AI insights that I use have more to do with, swimming, cycling, and running, but yet the insights of when I'm having an anomaly and it's now an alert, I can take that and I go from being just a patient calling my physician or seeing my physician and saying, here's how I feel, and feelings are very expensive to treat. Instead, I can be a co-collaborator with my physician and I can say, here's a data point. Here's an insight that is now valuable. Data being now a common language that I and my doctor can speak to get to a diagnosis or a change in therapy plan faster. And so I just see where we're going in this application of ingesting lots of data from new data types, from the many devices and sensors that digital health and remote patient management is bringing, but sifting through it and making it useful in not just being a patient, but going back to being a person with the right information to do the things that are important to me. And that's when I think we will find being able to engage people in being more interested in their wellness and their being a patient that's, choosing to embrace digital technologies and doing a lot of these things. It's when there's something in it for them, because it gets them to that thing that they want to do most in life, that gets them excited to wake up each day. None of us gets excited about waking up to be a better patient. We get excited about, achieving goals and dreams. And that's how I got into, my early adoption of some of these technologies. Is I wanted to figure out how to go back to being an athlete, because I didn't want to be limited to the life of a, heart patient or victim. So I'm excited about where we're going.
That's amazing, Heidi. And that's why I asked this question to Heidi, and this is a question to everybody. Is the future that we're facing, which is already here, the new health system, there's no hospitals anymore, there's Microsoft Health. And Heidi she explained AI better than anybody who's involved in this, what this means for her. She just told us that she can diagnose herself, make herself feel better in wellness, and that's with an AI concept. And put it under the Microsoft big, I'm not sure it's Apple, I don't want to make a commercial to anybody here, have Biotronic fill the pacemakers part of it, or Medtronic, whatever, have Janssen do the whole drug supplies for that website that they called Microsoft Health. And if somebody wants an AFib ablation, there's an AI told them you are a candidate based on your fibrosis image, or based on the electrogram, or based on whatever. Go to Greg in UCSF, or come to Tulane, whatever. Is this happening as we speak, David?
Yeah, first of all, I love your vision. I think that generally speaking, we are past the tipping point. What has happened with COVID-19 has pushed the entire industry and the world to thinking about what we oftentimes refer to as this new normal. And it's also made many of us sort of rethink what is the next phase of our careers, of our life. Clinicians need to start thinking about the embrace of digital health and the technologies and how they will be using this on a go-forward basis. In all likelihood, their practice will not be the same as what it was pre-COVID-19. Patients are also going to be thinking about the same as well. They're starting to get used to some of these virtual visits, starting to get used to some of these technologies. And once people have that familiarity, they're less likely to then go back to things that are much more difficult. So, the technology companies and the organizations around healthcare that are actively engaged are starting to rethink, what is it that we need to do to support this new ecosystem of technologies and stakeholders. And certainly at Microsoft, and I know across the board, we've been looking at, the end-to-end user experience, trying to think about how do we improve, streamline, make it safer, secure, but also do it in a way that is going to ultimately be something that provides immediate value. I think that this is an exciting time. It's an unfortunate thing that we had to have a pandemic to kind of force us into this kind of emergency mode. But what it has done is it's transformed the way that we're going to be dealing with technology and medicine in the go forward.
Thank you, David. I have to jump and everybody 30 seconds. I give everybody 30 seconds because we are under time. I would like to talk another 2 hours about this. Seems like we have to have session number 2, Christina, maybe in 2 weeks to follow up on these questions. But can we, everybody end with 30 seconds, please, because we are at the end of our session. David, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, I agree with everything that's been said, and clearly the pandemic has really spurred technology. But when you look at it from the clinician side, I would have said even pre-pandemic that technology was not the rate limiting factor for a lot of what we want to do, but it's regulatory and reimbursement. And the pandemic has changed a lot of the regulatory, the bar has come down. And I think it's going to be hard to put that genie back in the bottle, that other things, reimbursement will continue to catch up, and that this is now, has been the catalyst for all of that to happen, because that was really lagging. So I think the future is bright. I think that the hospital at home, or whatever you want to call it, the horizon for that has moved much closer as a result of this.
Paul?
Yeah, look, I think what digital does is it's a major complement to personalization of medicine. The oncologists have known this for a long time, right? With samples, tissue samples, they phenotype people very carefully. It's very personalized. So I think it is here. It's going to only get even more important. But look, at the end of the day, what it won't do is it won't go and do an ablation. It won't put a pacemaker in, and it will not replace that doctor-patient relationship. Which is key. It's a key part of making that diagnosis and healing. So it will help, but it's not the panacea.
I hope, and thank you for allowing us to be important still, Paul. That's at least somebody said it today. Greg, send them flowers, please. Send them flowers too.
Yeah, so I was going to make a similar point, which is this is not necessarily, in the absence of COVID, it's not an either or. It's a hybrid. And this has been a major jolt to the system to make us all aware of what technology can do and force us to get used to using technology. And I think once this is thankfully behind us, then everyone's going to know that that's an option. And then we're going to figure out really when is it most efficient or most appropriate to go with a fully remote solution versus the in-person. So in that sense, hopefully this will contribute to well-being going forward.
Thank you, Greg. Heidi.
I'm excited about what this is bringing. It is this opportunity that we won't ever replace doctors, because I know I'm going to need new batteries. But what digital health and what this is doing is it's making me as a patient and as a person more accountable and more aware, and I'm a better partner with my physicians. And so I think that it's just going to continue to make patient-doctor relationships more effective, and the physician will get to know the person behind the patient.
Thank you, Heidi. That's a great ending. And thank you, everybody. That was a lot of fun, and we learned a lot. I hope everybody else has did as well. And then I appreciate spending time with us. This last hour was very educational, and defining the present and the future together will be a major mission for everybody involved. And I hope to see you another session soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.